Hello, everyone. Welcome to Pints and Politics. I'm your host, Drew, along with the other host, Mike. Mike, you're in a different place today. Where are you?
I am stuck down here in the cities. I've got to spend the night. I've got to talk in the morning before I head home. So
Okay.
I will staying down here one more night.
Yeah, it's how's the week been so far?
This time of session, it's a lot of bills. We spend time on the floor. It's kind of a hurry up and wait thing a lot of days where we'll gavel in, recess because committees are the ways and means and the rules. I'm sorry, they have to have their meetings and so forth. Reconvene later when they're done, come back to the floor, talk about bills and so forth. So sometimes we've got a couple hour wait where we're just, you know, waiting until the other committees get their stuff done.
That's
Although we've
fair.
got some bills yet that haven't made it through our tax committee. Tax committee, interestingly enough, is the only committee that we don't have to have a tax bill. All the other
How does
ones are
that
required. If we
how
don't
does
have a
that
tax
work?
bill, that we just use the taxes that were in place before.
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
That's interesting. Fun fact. Well,
first
speaking
time
of
I've heard.
taxes, I learned something this last week here. I was hearing from my county commissioner, or one of them. And he was talking about how property taxes keep going up, keep going up. Income tax isn't going up, which is nice. But I guess our county levy is going up. And I believe county levy is how much money the county has to tax the constituents, right? Or the budget
Yeah,
that they need to.
it's basically to operate
Okay.
what they need to operate.
Yeah. And I'm hearing about how that levy is going up due to state mandates. There was a bill that was passed last year, and now we need a bunch more human services. Does that ring a bell?
So there was quite a bit of unfunded mandates that came down from the state, and those bills, the paid family medical leave, sick and safe leave time, MAFPA, which is the African American Preservation Act, and I think there was one other one that was the big ones. And all of those are going to come down to the counties, which your county commissioners are talking about. And I've talked to them about a fair amount. And the tax burden is going to be shifted to the citizens in that area. And what it is it's basically, I would say, creative accounting. And I think I've used that term before. When you take the tax burden from one area and you just shift it to another. So, in order to balance the budget, they the state isn't going to supply the revenue for those things. It's going to say that you have to do this. Therefore, the counties have to levy the citizens to do what the state mandates. Now, there's a little bit of history involved in some of this too. So in the 1950s and 60s, the state's operating budget, the majority of that came from property taxes. And they said this just doesn't work. It wasn't it was too expensive to own property in Minnesota, really, because you were getting taxed so much. So we didn't even have an income tax in the state of Minnesota until 1933, I think it was. And then it was even pretty small. So since 33, we've become, off the top of my head, I think we're the highest income tax, either first or fifth highest income tax in the nation.
Yeah, we're up there.
Right. And what happened with that state budget, they had it in the 1970s. They called it the Minnesota Miracle. They readjusted how the state is budget, how the state collects its funds. And instead of taking it from property taxes, they started taxing income and sales tax to create the revenue for the state budget. Now, at that time, the property tax, I think, was like 50%, 53%, somewhere in there, that was funding the state, was coming from property taxes. And with that Minnesota Miracle, it dropped down into the Oh, if I remember right, it was like 10 or 12% somewhere in there. Now, if I had the graph here, you would see it very well. What we see is the the property taxes came and it hit the Minnesota Miracle, how that funded the budget just dropped off. And then what you start seeing is that the income tax and the sales tax starts going up like this to pay for more of the budget. And now at the same time, your property taxes are following the same curve. And we're at 30 some percent of the state budget is being funded by property taxes. So what
Okay.
was fixed with the Minnesota Miracle in the 1970s, we're heading right back there where pretty soon the property taxes are going to be forced to cover more of the state budget. So
Yeah,
much for fixing.
which is unfortunate because we have super high income tax and our property taxes keep going up. And I think they're both going up at roughly, oh, they're both increasing because what you're talking about, one was low and the other was high, and now they're both going high, is what I'm
Correct.
seeing. Yeah. That's gonna
We're
make it really
becoming
hard to live, isn't it?
exactly. We're becoming an overtaxed state. And Reagan used to put it the best. We don't have a tax problem, we have a spending problem. And that's really where we're at. And now they're getting more and more creative on how to figure out ways to tax you more. So, social media, they were talking about that this year as creating a social media tax. Well, where does that tax fall? Do you think the
Yeah.
large corporations are going to pay for that tax? No.
What's
They're
the
simply,
social media tax supposed to be? What's that look like?
um,
Just
I
tax
would
the account, like you tax Facebook for operating in Minnesota, or
pretty much Facebook, X, different platforms and stuff. You know, the tax committee chair said that how bad stuff that's going on social media and everything else. So we need to tax this because these big corporations and businesses aren't paying their fair share. Well, the question then becomes, what are you going to do with the revenue if you tax the social media? If you say that this is such a problem that we need to tax it, then why aren't you spending the revenue from that tax on addiction issues? Or why aren't you spending it on getting kids off of social media because they talked about the bullying and everything else? But no, the money would just go into the general fund, which
yeah.
means it's just more money for them to spend. So it's one thing after another with more and more taxes. And it kind of reminds me of this. This was years ago, snowmobiling on a trip. We stopped at a little bar, a little gas station, or a little bar rather, and had a bite to eat. And they had a meat raffle going on, and you buy your ticket. And they on the back of each one of the tickets was a nice little saying. So I don't know if you can read it there,
I think you've
but
shown me that before.
great, a penny saved is a government oversight, and
Right.
that's
Yes. I remember that. That's hilarious.
it is so frustrating being in the state of Minnesota and government here and seeing that they're trying to come up with more and more ways to raise revenue for the state, but not at all looking at serious ways to cut spending.
Right. And I guess I brought up this county thing because it's a very sneaky way of screwing over the property owners in Minnesota. So if you own property and you're seeing your taxes go up, it's so the government can waste your money. That's really what it is because we do have a spending problem.
That's right. Until we fix the spending problem, you can tax all you want, and it's the other issue is you're not going to get out of it by taxing more and more. Um, so a friend that was a banker years ago had said this, and I've heard it many times in many different forms, but you can't use a method to get out of a problem that you use to get into it.
Yeah, you can't beat a crack addiction with more crack.
Yeah, I have no personal experience on that one, but
Oh, that's
it
good.
it makes sense. So we don't have a tax problem. There is so much revenue in this state. We simply have a spending problem.
Well, I'd say
And
as of right now, I'd say we do have a tax problem. It's too high. And it's because of our
well,
spending. So if we
yep,
can lower one, we should also be lowering the other.
exactly. And that bill that I had this year actually would have helped, you know, hardworking people across the state, and that
Yeah.
would drop lower tax bracket. At the same time, the Democrats and the other side want to increase the top tier, which means the people making over, and I think it was $1 million, would be paying a higher percentage now. So the problem is we're driving income and people out of our state. We've lost over $2 billion worth of income in the state of Minnesota because of
Yeah.
our tax structure.
Yeah, we're
So if
driving people out, and then I'm going to use the phrase pulling up the ladders behind you for owning property, because that higher property tax makes it harder to buy a house or buy land. And then higher property taxes, it's going to raise your rent if you're a renter too.
has
It's
a
all in
negative
all.
it has a negative effect all the way down the line, doesn't it? Everybody says we
Mhm.
have a housing shortage in the state of Minnesota.
Yeah,
Well,
nobody can afford it because of the taxes.
that's the taxes, it's regulation in this state. It's so many things that factor into it. Yeah, we're basically selling our kids' future so that we can have some a
Minor
nice
luxuries.
minor luxuries now. Exactly.
Sell out your kids so you can go talk to somebody about your feelings. I mean, like, not
Well,
to be rude, but you can get free therapy by becoming a Christian and going to confession. Talk to your priest, right?
go spend a little time in the box, and it's pretty amazing when you get to lay out your soul a little bit. It's great therapy. It really is. I feel
Yeah.
sorry for people that have never experienced it because you're right. It's
And
free
if you look at
therapy.
it from a money perspective, you're saving so much more money. You just drop a 20 like once a week instead of paying $150 a session.
Yep, there's a collection basket right up front. I don't think any church will turn down money.
Yeah. And it's a goodwill donation.
There you go. But no, we are in this state. We're creating an environment where we're driving people out, we're driving income out, and the tax burden with less people, because I think we've lost about 20,000 people. Oh, that's the other thing that's going to happen in our state is we're actually going to end up losing because we've lost some population. We will lose a congressional district more than likely with the next census. So right now we have 8 congressional districts, but more than likely we will drop down to 7. And it probably should have happened last time if census counts had been accurate.
Yeah, that'd be rough. Could you imagine what that would look like? Because we're in Congressional District 7, and that district's huge.
Exactly. How they're going to realign that, I couldn't tell you, but that's all based on population. And if we
Mhm.
don't have the population to support it, that will definitely change. Would it be like a northern part and a southern part? I don't know. Don't know how they're going to divvy that up, but
Yeah.
it will be interesting.
Well, I guess that means we should be focusing on 2030 for the governor race in 2030.
Well, here's the other problem. And so we're going through pieces of legislation now, and we're looking at these omnibus bills, which in all actuality, I have a serious dislike for omnibus bills. They're against our Constitution. We're not supposed to be legislating this way. But what we're seeing is these omnibus spending bills, right? And we're not raising any taxes right now in the state. The governor's budget proposals had some revenue raisers. We're raising some taxes, but he also had one that was cutting sales tax. But overall, it was going to create more revenue with his new taxes than any um, revenue cut by a sales tax. So overall, we're still raising taxes in the state of Minnesota with his budget. House Republicans are saying no new tax, or we're going to hold firm on taxes, which is a great stance. But we're not spending really any less. Our budget went from 50 billion to 71 billion in one session, one biennium, and now we're looking at this. $6 billion deficit, right?
Right.
But we're not cutting any more of our spending.
Can
So
we
we're,
cut like
why not?
legislatively? Okay.
Well,
Like
if you can,
I know physically we can. I'm just I guess before the show we were talking about some leadership agreements and I was worried about violations in that.
well, when it comes to those budgets and stuff, really what both parties look at, what both sides look at is election cycles. So instead of trying to make some serious cuts in the budget to balance that now, but then they risk the potential of winning elections in 2026. So nobody wants to make serious cuts because of the potential of losing majorities.
Right.
Unfortunately, what we're doing is we're kicking the can down the road. And
And we
whoever
see
wins,
that way too often.
exactly. And what happens? In 2026, the situation is only that much worse.
Mhm.
And looking at budgets, looking at revenue, looking at global economies and so forth, I think that $6 billion deficit will probably closer to 8 to 10 by the time we get to that point.
Right.
And
And that's
then go ahead.
yeah, no, keep going. I'm agreeing with you verbally.
So when we get to that point, now you've got this huge, um, deficit, this fiscal cliff. The pain is just that much worse to try to make those cuts and balance that budget. Where we could have started making some more serious cuts now, we're choosing not to. And I just don't think that's the right way to do this.
Yeah.
If your personal checkbook, let's just say you're working a job and all of a sudden your hours get cut, right? So your income goes down by 30%. Do you still live the same lifestyle that you had when you were at 100% income?
No, no,
No.
absolutely not.
You look at the wants versus the needs, you're probably going to say, I can't go out and eat, 5 times a week. I'm going to have to just buy some more groceries and, eat bologna sandwiches or whatever else. You're going to say, I don't have money to go to the bar or to, um, you know,
Yeah, go
whatever.
see a movie or whatever. You got to cut back so you can survive.
That's right. So on your
Yeah.
personal level, you see this and you make those changes. If a business loses revenue because of a loss of a contract or whatever, they're
They
going to
got to
make
drop
cuts.
employees. They got to make
Right.
cuts. Yeah. You got to
And
downsize.
for sure, at the state level, we don't like doing that because it might lose us an election. Yet at the same time, the pain that's going to come if we don't is just really, really bad.
Okay, so I
And I
mentioned crack earlier, but what you're describing is a heroin addiction. And a heroin addiction, not that I've ever been on one, but if you know
once again,
anything about opiates, is that with opiate withdrawals can kill you. Like heroin withdrawals can kill you, and in a way, they're acting like they're on heroin, where if they stop doing heroin, they'll die. So if you replace heroin with the word spending and the word die with lose your election, that's kind of the situation that it sounds like you're describing to me.
well, and so many of these things in politics, this is what happens. We simply kick the can down the road and let somebody else deal with it. So, immigration, let's talk about that for a second.
Okay.
I like going back and listening to old political debates, discussions, and so forth, and look at how many presidential debates they've talked about immigration. And we have to fix this immigration problem. I'm pretty sure Reagan talked about it. So, going back to the 1980s, we've heard this. And yet,
Hmm.
has anybody really fixed the immigration issues? No. So now you've got the issues that we're dealing with, and people are getting, some people are really scared about what's happening, and probably
Yeah.
rightfully so. But we should have fixed the problem years ago, and we wouldn't be in this position.
Hmm. That's all it is. It's like a heroin addiction. You let it get worse and worse, and eventually you feel like you can't, so you give into it. And
Right.
as far as immigration goes, well, immigration and government spending are two things we really do need to get under control because both can kill us. Like metaphorically speaking. Immigration, maybe literally, because I think even up in Managa, like within the past 2 weeks, there was a illegal migrant from Guatemala. I just heard about this the other day. He was drunk driving on the wrong side of the road and hit some kids.
Really?
Yeah, I just heard about this. So
I
I
heard
should
that.
verify it, but so as far as the internet is concerned, this is a rumor, but I'm inclined to believe it from my source. Also, it's so local, people talk like that.
Right.
So it's even up in Wadena County.
And there again, when the governor on a bill last year, year before, said that if this bill saves one life, then it's worth passing. Oh, the red flag law.
Yep, red flag laws, that's the one.
So aren't other people's lives just as important? When you have somebody break the law. And why do we decide that we're going to turn a blind eye to one law and not another? What if right now the police said, you know what, we're not going to go after drunk drivers anymore because we just don't think it's worth it. They're just trying to live their lives. They're just trying to live day by day. So we're not going to
Yeah,
go after drunk drivers anymore. How long would that go? How happy would people be about that?
yeah, they
I got to
wouldn't.
I
Well, you
think they'd
brought
be
up a
pretty
really
upset.
interesting point. Like, what happens when you turn a blind eye to one law or one situation with the law and not another? And the greater question with that is we're seeing that a blind eye to the law with immigrants, for example, like drunk driving, like that guy might not get any punishment, but the law-abiding citizen with red flag laws. And at what point, and this is just a question, it's not loaded, but at what point when you start acting that way where some laws are valid and some aren't, when does the law become credible or the justice system when you do that? When you pick and choose what laws you enforce?
Well, and we've talked about just laws before.
Hmm.
And what's the term I'm thinking of? Oh, shoot. I'm drawing a blank now. But like fair,
Like the
uh,
word fair or like a county fair?
no, like the word fair or equality.
Oh
Basically, is
yeah.
everybody treated equal? Well,
Yeah.
if you're going to turn up a blind eye to some laws, but not others, pretty soon, what's the point of following any law? There's
Yeah.
no, there's really
I
no
suppose that's what
incentive.
I'm asking.
Yeah. What's the incentive for you to follow the law if the next person doesn't have to?
Right. I suppose that's kind of a dark road, but
It kind of is.
it's kind of the
And
situation that we're facing. And I would like to live in a world where all of our laws are valid and treated with some dignity and respect, but yeah, who
right, but
knows?
if we have laws like immigration laws that are at the federal level, how can
Mhm.
we as the state say that we're not going to follow those federal laws?
Right.
You know, it's as Obama put it when he talked about the immigration law years ago, we are a nation of immigrants, but we're also a nation of laws. And if you're coming into this country, you have to do it the right way. That's what he said. And
Yeah,
actually,
I'm
I
gonna push
agree.
back on that today.
Why?
Like,
How's that?
well, we're a nation. Like we didn't form as a nation of strictly migrants. We were colonists, and then we formed the nation. So there were people before America was America as a British colony. So
Well, most of the people, and I think that phrase means most of the people came here as
yeah,
immigrants,
no, I
immigrated
get it.
from.
My family came here as immigrants, like not like my direct, but ancestors, like 3 to 5 generations back.
See, and I think Michael Knowles talked about this just recently on one of his. He says, we didn't really come from a nation of immigrants, or we weren't necessarily immigrants, we were pioneers.
Yeah, explorers.
right. You came here um, building a country. You came here um, developing something. Now, when somebody else comes as an immigrant, or now the country's already built, everything
Right.
is in place here. So the people that came before really struggled. They
And they
worked
built the
hard,
country.
right?
Yeah,
It's
I like
different,
that. I like the word pioneer. That's a better term than immigrant. Because immigrant, you're
probably.
going to something established. Pioneer is like you're building it.
Hmm. So the
But
people that were here before, they did struggle. I mean, look at the 1930s. What happened in our country? The Dust Bowl and the
yeah,
Great Depression. Those people were struggling to get by. So many of them lost their property and their homes and moved to other places and so forth. It was not easy. And now, yes, we want those immigrants to come here, but at the same time, what we're doing is we're creating an unfair system sometimes where people are expecting handouts.
yeah.
Well, is that right? Because how can you take out of one person's charity or a handout, which is basically a type of charity? It's not really charity when you stole it from me in the first place.
Yeah, government can't be a charity. If you're forcing somebody to pay taxes, if you're levying a tax from one person to give to another, that's extortion.
Yeah,
Because like if you don't pay the tax, you get punished. Guys
right.
with guns show up to put you in a box. If they do that with like protection money, like it's a nice house you got here, you know, you're Jimmy Hoffa types. It's not charity. And
Should
I
I
think I've
tell
said that a
you?
lot on this show.
Yeah.
But
But people were generous as well years ago. I mean, look
mhm.
at charities that took place, the hospitals, the schools that were not publicly funded at that time. Most of them were privately funded. The building of churches across our nation, those were all privately funded. People had uh, revenue that they gave to the churches and to these other institutions. And now, once the state takes over those places, they have to raise taxes because people don't have or aren't willing to give either. You know,
Right.
how can you give something that when you're barely scraping by? And that's where I think injustice, I guess that's the term I was thinking of before. It's an injustice to take to one person who is struggling to give to another person. How is that right? So up in
Yeah,
Todd County or Wadena, two of the poorest counties in the state, and you're going to levy taxes on them to pay for what? That's
yeah,
not right.
it's not. But we could go on and on about this, Mike. Is there anything else you wanted to talk about today? I think we touched it over here on my end.
um, it's been a long week, and I know we had some things that we talked about before, but I'm kind of drawing a blank as well.
It's all good. Well, we have more podcasts coming up, so that's
Yeah,
the
and
that's the nice thing about doing them.
I'm hoping next week I talked to a couple different reps, and this one got pushed back to Friday. I'm hoping to
Okay.
have one or two of those reps if we can do it during the week, where we could sit down and talk and get some other perspective on how the session's going and how their take is about legislation and laws and so on and so forth.
So it sounds
But
like we got some interviews coming up, and that's what we got. But before we get into that, Mike, we'll do that off screen, behind the scenes.
okay,
But anyway, thank you guys so much for watching. I hope you learned something today about property taxes and justice and charity. As always, I'm Drew Peterson with Mike. I got my cat meowing at me. She wants to be in here. I'll show my cat. The thing is, if you don't see her, you're gonna hear her. She's been meowing at me this whole show.
she
And if I
blended right
close the
in.
door, she's gonna bang on the door. And that's just the nature of it. But again, this is Pints and Politics. God bless.